Writing in the Dutch neoplasticist art journal De Stijl, the painter Piet Mondrian argued that the style of dancing that emerged in the early 20th century, which tended to take place in lines, replaced an older set of forms, like waltzes and quadrilles, in the shape of circles. The machine, he wrote, is more and more taking the place of natural forces. In fashion, we see a characteristic tightening of form and an internalization of color, both of them signs of a withdrawal from nature. Mondrian's most famous paintings have grid patterns, which some art critics have likened to maps. He lived in an era of great confidence in the ability of humans to rationally plan whole societies, an assumption that underlay progressivism, modernism, and socialism, as well as utopian and avant-garde art. And yet the impulse to structure, order, and plan is much older, and very close to the heart of what it is to be human. In the book of Genesis, God tells Adam and Eve to fill the earth and subdue it. The grid, more than any other, is the form by which mankind subdues the earth, imposes order, and subjects it to rational planning. To an archaeologist, discovering a settlement planned on a grid is to discover civilization. It's clear evidence of a society sufficiently powerful and complex to rationally structure the lives of the people who lived there. It's a form that has been used by various cultures, seemingly independent of one another, across space and time. In all four cradles of civilization of the Old World, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and China, and the two in the New World, the Andes and Mesoamerica, one can find examples of settlements built in a grid pattern. If any of these societies explain themselves about why they chose such a plan, those explanations are lost to us. The only surviving written record comes to us in the form of inscriptions, and however important it might have been to them, a treatise on planning isn't the sort of thing that would be written in stone. But we can infer some things from the evidence available. For example, because a grid must be either built from scratch in an unoccupied place, or else placed on top of an existing city, we know the society that built it must have been highly organized, enough to build the city as well as provide the inducement to live there, in the form of protection or commercial opportunities. The story of the grid in written history begins with the Greeks. Most often, it begins with a Greek, Hippodamus of Miletus, who lived on the southwestern coast of Anatolia in the 5th century BCE. Almost all of what we know about him comes from secondary sources, and while he might be described as the grid's earliest known exponent, theorist, and popularizer, he did not invent it, as dozens of archaeological sites attest. Even Aristotle does not seem totally clear about his role. In Book 2 of the Politics, Aristotle says Hippodamus invented the division of cities, whereas in Book 7 he describes the modern fashion of laying out cities which Hippodamus introduced. In the campaigns of Alexander the Great, we can see the association between military conquest and grid planning. As his vast empire broke up into a collection of Greek-inflected states, successor kingdoms like the Seleucids in Persia and Mesopotamia began to build grid-based towns like Dura, a waypoint between Antioch and Seleucia on the Tigris River. In these examples, we can see how the grid served to order not just the natural world, but conquered nations and territories as well, a strategy used much more famously by the Romans. The relationship between grids and conquest is evident in the fact that Rome did not build in a grid pattern very often during its monarchical and early republican phases. While there were definitely Greek-influenced towns in Italy at the time that did, notably Marzabotto, Romans themselves did not begin using it widely until the late Republic, when its borders were expanding rapidly. Its larger armies and interchangeable force structure also would have made standardization necessary, and led to the development of the ubiquitous castra, a grid-based military camp that was built the same way, to the same dimensions, every time a legion bivouacked. In the Middle Ages and early modern periods, the close association of conflict and grid planning continued. The most iconic examples are the Bastides of southern France. The earliest of these were built in Languedoc following the Albigensian Crusade, to re-establish control over lands that had fallen to the Cathar heresy. Later examples of Bastides have their origins in the dynastic struggle in which the English Plantagenet kings attempted to assert their claims in Aquitaine. In the early modern era, Valletta, the capital city of Malta, was rebuilt in 1565 on a grid plan, having been utterly devastated during the desperate but ultimately successful defense of the island by the Knights Hospitaller against the forces of the Ottoman Sultan. It would take the supposedly untouched expanse of North America for grid-based organization to be done on a truly continental scale. The same rationalism that attracted avant-garde painters like Mondrian also held appeal for Thomas Jefferson. And like the Romans, when a young America, led by Jefferson, found itself in possession of a vast, untamed expanse of land, one of the first things it did was put a grid on it. The scale was necessary this time because, unlike older societies, the Jeffersonian ideal of an agrarian republic with widespread property ownership demanded that the land be divided and apportioned out. In his novel about America's two most famous line drawers, Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon, the writer Thomas Pynchon gave this memorable description of how the North American continent was rationalized. Does Britannia, when she sleeps, dream? Is America her dream? In which all that cannot pass in the metropolitan wakefulness is allowed expression away in the restless slumber of these provinces, and on westward, wherever 'tis not yet mapped, nor written down, nor ever by the majority of mankind seen, serving as a very rubbish tip for subjunctive hopes, for all that may yet be true. Earthly paradise, fountain of youth, realms of Prester John, Christ's kingdom, ever behind the sunset, safe till the next territory to the west be seen and recorded, measured and tied in, back into the network of points already known, that slowly triangulates its way into the continent, changing all from subjunctive to declarative, reducing possibilities to simplicities that serve the ends of governments, winning away from the realm of the sacred its borderlands one by one, and assuming them unto the bare mortal world that is our home and our despair. Nothing is more iconic of reducing possibilities to simplicities than the grid, which, after all, allows you to describe a place as a coordinate. Over time, it would come to be associated with other ideas too, public health and orderly civic life in William Penn's case, or freedom from the congested confusion of European cities to Ildefonse Cerdà. In every case, a grid is a statement of power, a demonstration of environmental mastery, and one that betrays a confidence, perhaps a naive confidence, that orderly societies can be created, or at least encouraged through the ordering of their physical structure.